Hi, Olivia.
Morning. Hi, everybody.
Oh, we're hearing you very strong.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's not your fault.
I've got a fancy headset on because it gives a clearer sound.
Yeah, very clear. Very
Okay,
clear.
good.
Ellen, would you be able to speak a bit loud and we check that the camera is working?
Do you hear me well? Is it okay for you?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can. Hi. Yeah, I can hear you. Okay, yeah.
Oh, that's it. Now it's working. Great. Fantastic. Good.
Okay, I'll come back on in a second.
No worries. Yeah. Yep. Gloria.
Oh, that's okay. How about one? So, oh, to say, I thought you said, are you able to screen video? No. Yeah. Yeah, why not? One thing. I thought you were on. No, you were speaking to different person.
Yeah.
So I said, after my. Oh, yeah, we've got our papers.
How are you? Oh, yeah, no, oh, sorry. Yeah. Thank you. Or do you want to where you want to? Yeah. Yeah. This is better, right?
Sorry. Seven minutes. My hand is protected.
Yeah, it was fine. Very quiet. Very quiet. Small things.
I'm in a wheelchair.
Sorry.
I have a
Yeah. I think we can start. We have a good attend. Have 11 people online.
Okay.
So
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. It's really a pleasure for me to open this conversation for this side event on over-reliance on punishment and decriminalization of drug offences. And our side event today is part of this CND event, and we are going to address one of the very critical topics that is addressed and that was addressed in the Office of the High Commissioner 2023 excellent report. If some of you are not really familiar with the report, I can have this here summary of the document with the key recommendations made by the Office of the High Commissioner. So I will be also very happy to give you some of these recommendations. And as you probably already know, one of the very strong stands taken by the Office of the High Commissioner is precisely in favor of the decriminalization, because, and I think we all share this position and this view, the so-called war on drug was absolutely or is absolutely non-efficient, counterproductive, triggers a lot of discrimination, harmful effect on people having drug, using drug, or people considered as drug traffickers. So today, to discuss this question of over-reliance on punishment, we have a wonderful panel. So we are going to start with a short video. So I'm ready to be sure not to mispronounce the name. So it's a video opening remarks by Honorable Seth Kwame Afi-Wampong, Minister of the Eastern region of Ghana. And I forgot to say that this event is organized, and I thank you very much. I thank very much the lead organization, FOSS of Ghana. So it's the lead organization of our event. So now I give the floor to for the video to the minister. Andrea, it's up to you.
Good morning, Madam Moderator. Good morning, my fellow panelists. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Ghana's new journey in drug policy. Ghana is a signatory to all UN conventions, started off with the PLDC Law 236, which centered on war on drugs, punitive measures. 2020, Ghana reformed a 236 Act, which was a 1998 law, into the Narcotics Control Commission Act 2020, Act 1019. In Act 1019, the law presented the conversation and the shift from war on drugs to public health conversation and the rights for people. And this, the Narcotics Control Commission, that is a body corporate established by the Act, is mandated to educate stakeholders. Here, the judiciary and other enforcement services within the security architecture. Further to that, it also offers rehabilitation measures by way of harm reduction. Currently, the Commission is in the process of developing a harm reduction regulation. And already it has prepared a regulation on alternative development, all respecting the rights and freedoms of people. The prisons of Ghana, in particular our medium-sized prison, is housing numbers akin to maximum prison centers. By this new law, persons who possess and use drugs are not offered custodial sentencing again. They are allowed to pay a fine by the judge and referred to a rehabilitation center for reformation. These are acts that have helped to promote Ghana as one of the leading nations in Africa. Ghana continues to shine, and the new law again helps Ghana and mandates the Commission to educate the youth, and by so get them to desist from acts which will end them in hostile institutes, in juvenile prisons. So we, by the law, have helped through the judiciary reduce congestion in our prisons. And this, I believe, is a middle class to people of that. And the black law of the civil reform society. Ghana couldn't have arrived here without the involvement of civil society. Civil society have been of great and immense help to the parliamentarians who enacted the law, as well as the executive that piloted the law. And I want to use this opportunity to.
That's it. Missed a bit early. That's it.
Thank you, thank you. It's really excellent to see, and I like the way it's presented. I mean, the minister said that it was a sort of new, I'm quoting, new journey on drug policy reform, and it's interesting because it shows very clearly that there's no fatality in using, excessively using criminal legislation, prisons, and against drug offenses. So indeed, Ghana is a leading nation for Africa, but not only. I mean, for me, it's really a leading example of this positive shift from war on drug to what is said, public health conversation. So I hope the Ghana example will also be followed by others. Now we have our next speaker online. So Olivia is the Executive Director at Penal Reform International, NGO working globally to promote criminal justice system, human rights for all and do not harm. So Olivia is an expert on a range of human rights and criminal justice topics, having authors, key publication and training materials, and worked extensively with UN, other institutional actors, other international organizations, and health. So Olivia, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and good morning to you all in Vienna. I'm really thrilled to be here, albeit online. Unfortunately, I couldn't be in person. Thank you to the co-organisers and sponsors of this really important event. I only have 7 minutes, so my plan is to make 3 points in that 7 minutes, if I may. Firstly, the data, the numbers. So there are around 11.5 million people in prison worldwide in any given day. That would be at least 11.5 million people, and this is the highest ever recorded So the numbers just keep going up. And of this number, an estimated 2.2 million people are there for drug-related offences, and 500,000 of that 2 million are there for possession for personal use, which we know is increasingly decriminalised in various jurisdictions. About 1 in 3 people in prison are in pre-trial detention. In other words, they have not yet been convicted of a criminal offence. And unfortunately, this rate is remaining stable despite international law stipulating it should only be used as a last resort, and also all of the overwhelming evidence that it is really over-relied on to lean on the title of this event. And we see that pre-trial is often related to a person's ability to find money to pay bail. When it comes to women, we know that their numbers in prison are going up at a faster rate than for men, and this has been the case for the last 20 plus years. And drug policies are typically cited as the main reason for this, with many women ending up in prison for low-level drug offences in a context of discrimination and violence. They're usually minor actors in the drug trade, and they bear the full brunt of the law. So it's clear that drug policies continue to drive up prison numbers, unfortunately, in several regions, and often those regions have prisons that are facing really serious overcrowding levels and all of the human rights consequences that come with that, including in contexts where organised crime groups have taken control of prisons and exploit vulnerable people, including drug users. So my second point is perhaps a more positive one, and that is that we see and civil society documents more and more examples from different corners of the globe. We just heard from Ghana's leadership around this as well, that shows reform can be achieved, whether it's decriminalisation of drug use or sentencing people to a non-custodial community sanction instead of prison, for example. Last week at an event we convened at the Commission on the Status of Women in New York, I heard firsthand one example and the impact of this in Colombia, where there are 6,600 women in prison, with 42% of them for drug-related offences. And they have implemented a new law that's really diverting women who are heads of households in vulnerable conditions, sentenced for minor drug crimes, to be given a community service order. Other minor crimes are also eligible, I should say. And this is really in recognition of the harms of imprisonment on these women and also their children. So it's adopting really a child rights approach as well. The data shows that in the the short period that this has been implemented, there have been around 30 women, which admittedly is a small number, who have benefited thus far. But there is promise, as there is over 2,300 community service placements available ready for judges to place women in instead of prison. This law was really hard fought for, and it's really a fundamental shift in how we use or don't use prison as the default sanction. Another example of reform is in Thailand. Perhaps Gloria will speak to that point, and I suppose, you know, the trend is very positive in that way. But I have to say that moving away from this sort of so-called war on drugs to a more health-based, gender-sensitive, human rights-based policies that replace these ineffective ones is really a bit slow and too piecemeal in our opinion. So my final point I want to make is that in the international community of penal reformers, there is recognition and many, many declarations and efforts being made across the board to use and increase the use of alternatives to imprisonment that are really alternatives, because they are effective, because they are cheaper, and they are also likely to cause human rights violations, and you have more likely of achieving rehabilitation. Also, in the drug policy world, there's an increasing recognition that criminalisation and imprisonment, fiercely implemented under the war on drugs, has failed. And I've seen the statements at the CND in this regard. But if you look at who can benefit from alternatives to detention, for example, in the case of pre-trial alternatives, drug-related offences are often excluded. And when we look at the releases due to the COVID-19 pandemic, drug offences were also excluded in many cases. Depressingly, Harm Reduction International just released data that showed at least 467 people were executed for drug-related offences in 2023, a record high. So this situation where we can see one country handing down a death sentence for something where another country is moving towards a non-custodial sanction for the same points to evidence being ignored. We need policy making, we need sentencing reforms that is really informed by data and the evaluations and the evidence that we show that we all have at hand. These are the things that must drive the policies, not the politics and these empty promises around tackling crime and gangs and violence that is so intrinsically linked to drug policies. I'll leave it there as my time has just gone off, and I look forward to continuing the discussion. Thanks, Helene.
Thank you. Thank you, Olivia. Thank you, Olivia, for also bringing some other example in Colombia or in Thailand, and it goes in the same direction that what we heard for Ghana. Again, I mean, there's no fatality in this excessive use of criminal law, deprivation of detention, and so on. And thanks also for bringing into the conversation the children perspectives, because indeed, I mean, we discussed before this event, we heard a lot about situation of women in prison and so on, but there is also a very dramatic impact on children when they spend the first years of their life in prison with their mothers. So thank you also for bringing this into our conversation. Now I will give the floor to Jonathan Jose Owuzu, with 16 years experience in the field, founder and executive director of the Pause Foundation, leading human rights, civil and society organization in Ghana. So you are very familiar and aware of the situation of your leading country in this field. You facilitate state-led intervention, Justice for All program for remand retired detainees, prisoners towards prison decongestion. So you are very also familiar of our topics. You convener of the Ghana Civil Society Platform under the UNPR, and vice chairperson of the Ghana Human Rights NGOs Forum. So with such an impressive resume, Jonathan, much pressure on you. You have the floor for 8 minutes.
Thank you very much, and Madam Moderator. I'm privileged to be part of today's discussion and possibly organizing this with support from the Human Rights Commission and IDPC and etc. I wouldn't want to take much time on the introduction, and we'll move straight to the next slide, which talks about POS Foundation. You said a lot about us. If you mention POS Foundation, we are known for us in the criminal justice sector, human rights, gender, and drug policies. So I wouldn't want to, let's move to the next slide to talk much about it. Now you can see the picture there. That is the James Fort prison, which is no more a prison. This is how our prisons look like, and most of them currently look like. And if you look at the congestion, that is what we're going to talk about. We all know, as per the previous speakers, that prison congestion has become a big of a challenge and putting financial burden on states and government, of which Ghana is not an exception. When we received our colonial masters, let me say the British left us the constitution, the first prison that was established by them was having the authorized capacity of 68. The first day prison was introduced in Ghana, there was congestion. The capacity was 68, but it was holding 87 convicts, meaning the inception of prison in our jurisdiction like the British, there was congestion. So you can see on that when we inherited this during our independence, 1957, the overcrowding rate was around 48%. So you can still imagine how steadily congestion has become in our prisons, where we did not build prisons, but using castles and forts, that's the white used to and converted them to be prisons. You can see on from that presentation clearly that the overcrowding rate number and the rate of 46% is what currently seems to be statistics from Ghana Prison Service. We can move ahead. And so if I talk about the overcrowding rate to be 46, it may not be so cool, but if you look at specific prison condition, you will see that some are over 150% overcrowding rate. For example, if you look at the Nsamo medium security prisons, which is the biggest prison in our jurisdiction, it has the authorized capacity of 850, sorry, it's 50 in terms of the prison statistics. Currently, it's holding about 3,300. So you could see the picture and etc. And then you talk about Sunyani prisons, 460, it's holding 1,892. It moves across, and so you see that some specific prisons in terms of women and gender, you can see that women ratio to men ratio is 85:1. So a lot of men are incarcerated, and that I brought so that you see the gender issues here and there. We can move to the next just to paint the picture of why we need to decongest the prisons through decriminalization. So Ghana took a bold step to decongest the prisons with a programmatic intervention by name Justice for All. What we basically do is that we go to the prisons, it's a state-led, and then we set up mobile courts, special court in the prisons. We adjudicate remand cases. Remand is those who are on pre-trial. And some have been there for 10 years without trial, 6 years without trial. There's a man called Zulu Kuta who has spent over 20 years on remand without trial and benefited from this program. And as a result of the work led by the Judicial Service, facilitated by the Force Foundation, who serves as the legal team for both paralegals and lawyers for this inmate, we have been able to contribute to the reduction of the pre-trial population in Ghana's prisons from 33% in 2007 to currently 9.8%. And this is so remarkable that the Kenya have come to understand this, and they are doing thing called All for Justice, and Ghana is Justice for All. So these are my team interviewing them, preparing the application. These are how the courts are set up. It's just a prison, and then the courts are there. And it's a competent court of jurisdiction, and it's state-led, because if you don't have the state moving the agenda, there's nothing civil society can do. So if you hear the president on the 10th anniversary, he said, this is one of the unique partnerships between the state and civil society. So I would want to move to the next. So this has reduced the remand population, but don't forget, this is the rate. 2007, these are the number of people that were granted bail, discharged, convicted, and these are the percentages, so we can move ahead because a lot of achievement has been done by Ghana in terms of reducing the remand population, so we can move ahead. We can move ahead. Yes, and so now after doing this, it's an ad hoc way of clearing the prisons. What do we do with lasting solution in addressing the cutting or curbing the inflow of prisoners into the prison? And that is where we know that the Justice for All effectively did that. Now we realize that about 3.2% of our prison population were people who are there on drug-related issues. That is where we join stakeholders like IDPC, the West African Human Rights Network, and etc. in the advocacy for a new law to replace the PNDC Law 236 that was hinged on punishment, enforcement, and repression. So that is the picture of cutting the inflow systematically. What do we do? That's why we joined the advocacy. Let's move to the next one. And you can see community service was introduced by our office under the supervision of the Chief Justice, and together with the Ministry of Interior and then the Attorney General and Justice, we have a bill, and with stakeholder consultation, we have a bill currently before Cabinet that is yet to move so that we can have alternatives to incarceration. So the plan was to make sure that we cut the inflow of persons who causes misdemeanor and are sent there with the role of marijuana. They get inside there, they get contaminated, and then they come out meeting armed robbers, and then they are influenced, and they go back, as some of them will say, home sweet home with a gun. If it is not my life, it will be your life. For that reason, we need not to allow people with small crime go get into prison and get contaminated. So we are looking at prison decongestion through reforms, and the drug issue was key in that. And so on, just like we heard from the minister, who was the then chair of the Parliamentary Committee on Defense and Interior, who did extremely well in getting this new law passed that looks at public health and human rights, rather than looking at punitive actions for people who use drugs. And what is important to mention in the draft is that, and the law is that they've converted the minimum sentence of 10 years of possession into a fine. And the fine, we are still contemplating. Approximately, we are looking at $190. Those who are poor are the people who are arrested. If you get the rich, they would even probably deal with the situation from the police level before it gets to the court. So the rich is also not often affected. But when it comes to the criminalization of poverty, this is where you see, because the police will go in a police swoop, arrest them together somewhere. And if you don't have the money sometimes in that situation to pay, you are allowed to go to prison. And that is criminalization of poverty, that it is not good. Other jurisdiction, we've heard that it is the drug war is on color. Others is on this, but in our jurisdiction, it's more on poverty, and we don't want to look at that. So please, let's move to the. So these are some after the law. We didn't sit down with support from Open Society, IDPC, and etc., as well as GIZ and then other people. We met parliamentarians, and then we also met judges, because we needed to orient judges to understand the law. And so together with the Judicial Training Institute, these are judges being oriented, police who do the arrest, where the biggest challenge is, are being oriented to understand the new law. And we also met farmers. They were not actively included because in effect it's illegal to even cultivate, but we have been able to pay the law, open up discussions to include farmers, to get indigenous voice in the process. Let's continue. And so this is just a slide from UNODC, looking at unemployment, education, and how it's connected or intersects with drug use. And so I wouldn't want to take much on this particular slide, if time move on. And so these are recommendations that we are putting out there, that African states, we should learn from each other, like the Justice for All, to decongest the overcrowded prisons in Africa. And then like Kenya has done All for Justice. We picked a program from Kenya called Increasing Paralegal Program, and the other program was African Prisons Project, and we are doing something similar for people. Therefore, I would like to put, based on my work, I came up with this program, Africans problem is best solved when we apply Africans best practices or solutions that have been tested, proven, and adapt to our system. So that is our first recommendation. The second one, as I am closing, is the colonial laws that we have inherited. We need to take bold steps within the EU to change these particular laws so that we can adapt to public health and human rights perspective. And then also look at the Mandela rules, because the Mandela rules that has led us to Ghana about to introduce community service into our system. And before we passed our law, Professor Carl Hart was one of the pivotal advocates who came to do a public lecture, open up the discussions. Then we realized that there are a lot of eminent personalities who were in support of this, but were not talking. And then meeting Parliament to orient them, they were able to also have some understanding with data and science as to how we were able to arrive at this. Now, the last slide. I would just want to end with this quote, that in our struggle with the prisons, with the and sorry, I keep using prison because that is in our law. So correctional facility, we were able to come up with this. And I said, the incarceration or imprisonment of drug use is a complete deviation from human development. they need support. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jonathan. It was excellent, and I have already 3 questions for you, but I wait because I would like to give some space to the discussion. So I immediately give the floor to Gloria Lay. So we are very happy also to have Gloria in this panel. Gloria has been for over 7 years regional director for Asia and of the International Drug Policy Consortium, Global Civil Society Network on Drug Policy Reform. Prior to that, she worked as a senior policy advisor on law enforcement and drugs and as a lawyer for Australian government. So Gloria, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Helen. Yeah, and I think, thank you very much for the form of the panelists before as well. That was great to hear from Olivier to set the global context when it comes to the numbers of people in prison, particularly women, and great to hear from Jonathan about the work that amazing work that you do, you and your colleagues do in Ghana. I mean, focusing on Asia, it's really Southeast Asia where we work. So I'm gonna talk about some of the situation there and a bit about the work that we do there. So just the next slide, Andrew. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I mean, Olivia already presented some of the data globally. This is from one of our reports on decriminalisation, the guide to advocacy for decriminalisation for the use of drugs. And in there, one of the kind of main reasons for wanting to call or advocate for decriminalisation is the fact that we have a disproportionate number of people in prisons as a result of the drug laws and policies that we have. And I mean, Maria, my colleague Maria Nugier spoke specifically about women in prison in Latin America in an earlier side event this morning. I mean, if you look at Southeast Asia, it's very typical to see usually around half of the people in prison are there for drugs. For women, the percentage usually is higher. And they also see some of the highest rates of prison overcrowding in the world. I don't know if it's still the case now, but until recently, Philippines had the highest rate of prison overcrowding in the entire world. Like, I think it's around 400% at the moment. But yeah, my colleague Ines is there at the back. She could correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah. So we actually have colleagues here for CND. It's quite a rare privilege, I think, to have them join us at CND from Thailand, Indonesia, and the Philippines here. So we have circulated a paper and to share a bit about the situation and specifically the work that they do with women and trans women who use drugs and caught up in the criminal justice system. And I mean, to give more context about the impact of drug policies in Southeast Asia, just on the next slide, it's just a list of some of these impacts. There are a few countries in the world that still have the death penalty for drug offences, but most of them are in Southeast Asia. And Singapore, for example, it's for quite, well, I mean, it's these quantities, they have 5 grams, possession of over 5 grams of heroin in Singapore is presumed to be for trafficking and can lead to a death penalty. Extrajudicial killings, as you might have heard, that resulted from a drug policy that came into force in the Philippines under President Duterte in 2016, since 2016. But there were cases of these killings even before that. We had disproportionate penalties and sentencing under our drug laws, and that's one of the major reasons why so many people are in prison for drugs. And because of the incredible amounts of investment that is put into enforcing drug laws through law enforcement, there are also a lot of abuses that happen to people as a result of policing. So even before you get to the stage of detention or incarceration or criminal conviction, there's already a high risk of abuses by police. And this is especially the case, even more the case if you are a woman, if you are an LGBT person. So there are layers of stigma and criminalization to see violations of cultural traditional rights of indigenous groups. particularly those who have practices in using and growing opium and cannabis around the region. And one of the major kind of both the human rights impact and a major barrier in moving forward is that what is framed as a health approach to drugs is actually another form of abuse, because a lot of the drug rehabilitation services that are provided by governments in Southeast Asia are in the form of detention. They are coercive and they don't allow people to leave. I think because of all this, it gives a strong case for decriminalizing it. Thank you, Adria. Yeah. And actually, decriminalization is just the starting point, actually, to address a lot of these human rights issues. For IDPC, we call for a gold standard of decriminalization, where all penalties, so it's not just criminal sanctions, but it's all forms of punishment, including a sentence into an order into a drug rehabilitation center, for example, we would describe as a form of punishment. Penalties, monetary penalties, for example. So we call for an end that if we are genuinely taking a health-based approach, we wouldn't impose any form of punishment or penalty for the use of drugs or for the possession of drugs for personal use. And there are other related activities that are associated with people who use drugs. Possession of drug use paraphernalia, for example. There are some countries where this is the Philippines, for example, where it's still a crime even to be in possession of drug use paraphernalia, such as syringes. And the other things for decriminalization, a gold standard would mean not just removing penalties, but it would mean investing more into the health, the harm reduction, and other social care services for people who use drugs in their communities as well. And I think moving on to the next slide, Adria. Olivia mentioned she mentioned the case of Thailand. So maybe I'll use that as a bit of an example. So I talked a lot about the challenges, but there are the opportunities that we see in some of the regions. Is a recognition from governments that there is a problem with prisons and the fact that they're so overcrowded. And there's a recognition that a lot of people are in prison for low-level drug offences. So there is some motivation to do something about that. And in Thailand, in the past almost 10 years, the Minister of Justice at the time wanted to push things forward and even propose decriminalization. And that led to a reform of the drug law that passed just a few years ago in 2021. But they didn't decriminalize, they didn't remove penalties for consumption. I think maybe it's worth highlighting here that in a lot of countries around the world, the use of drugs is not criminalized, it's possession of drugs. But in every country in Asia except for Myanmar, consumption itself is a crime. So even if you have no drugs in your possession, you can be stopped to do a urine test. And if your urine tests positive, that is a criminal offense. And I think that's one of the big reasons. And if even that was removed, the criminalization of consumption, it could have a bigger effect, because it would mean that police cannot stop you just to make you do a urine test, because for some reason they suspect that you might be using drugs. But in Thailand, they were moving in that direction, but still stopped short of doing that. So you still have criminal penalties for consumption and possession, but they scaled down the penalty. So essentially what they did was they depenalized, they pursued depenalization of drug offences. So the penalties are less amount of years in prison, for example, and more mitigating factors for judges. So they introduce more discretion for judges to make the decision to not give a sentence of imprisonment, but some other incarceration, for example, community service or electronic monitoring by putting that device on you, which is also has a lot of restrictions on your life in many ways. But I think generally, overall, the political situation makes it really difficult. And I don't know if this is, we see this in many other regions outside of Southeast Asia. I mean, Southeast Asia is really common for political leaders to rely on war on drugs. And literally the words war on drugs are still used a lot in Indonesia, for example. Being tough on drugs. And so usually when things are not going well for a political party, turning to a tough on drugs campaign is one way that they will use to try to get back the support of the public. And that really winds back whatever kind of policy reforms that you might have done in the past. And what we're seeing that is the case in Thailand at the moment. And moving forward, like trying to push for change, it's incredibly difficult because there's so many people you need to convince. There's the justice minister, but there's also the health side. And in Thailand, one lesson learned was we didn't do enough to engage the health side. And even when the justice ministry said, okay, this is a health issue now, the health ministry wasn't keen actually on taking on drug issues and don't have the capacity actually at the moment yet. And they need to be willing to invest in that. And then, of course, there are budgetary issues involved in that as well. There are a lot of entrenched interests in the fact that drugs remain prohibited and heavily enforced. There's a lot of money made out of the black market. And there's a lot of people, I assume, in high-level positions who profit from that. And I think that really stops things from moving forward. I mentioned before, compulsory drug rehabilitation centers. Sometimes it's not even corruption, it's just government budgets. And ministries want to retain large government budgets, and keeping drugs as an issue that is under their scope is one major motivation for example, continuing compulsory drug rehabilitation centers. And I think maybe I'll end just by saying that for civil society, it's another major barrier to moving forward to change, even though there are some opportunities, is that the shrinking space for civil society advocacy as governments have become more authoritarian, and they learn from each other in passing laws around foreign funding, around computer crimes. So like prosecuting people for posting things online that challenge government policies, and repression of media, for example. So there are opportunities, but the challenges are getting a bit bigger too. But I think I'll end there, and I think we have another speaker by video. Is that right?
We had a video.
Show it.
Yeah, we had like a video that we did a couple of years ago, but we only have 5 minutes left, so maybe it's better to use them for a conversation.
Yeah,
Yeah?
possible.
Yeah,
because,
let's do that.
I mean, your also presentation was fascinating. So, does anyone would like to ask questions, make comments, because otherwise, yeah, please.
So, I mean, one of the things, this is my first time being here. Absolutely.
Can you introduce yourself as well?
Oh, sorry.
My
My name is Colin Johnson. I'm from Canada. I represent an organization from harm reduction alliance, which I'm co-chair. We're like small community. We deal with drug policy in the city of Toronto, but also we also address it nationally. One of the things I've definitely come to realize is that we're all impacted by so much of these foolish laws and draconian stupidity is what I would begin to call it on the part of the government. I mean, I was actually here, and in one of the conversations, I actually heard a government member actually say the following words: "Just say no." And I thought to myself, what planet are we from? No, really. I mean, seriously, because I mean, we have beyond the slightest doubt that that does not work. Okay, and we need to move forward to your point with decriminalisation. We have the same issue in Canada. Our prisons are overcrowded. The majority of the Indigenous and Black, African and Black populations who the police have continually harassed and prosecuted for the smallest of drug charges. And, you know, we find this happening in every country, whatever your minority groups are, they're the ones who are suffering. We know this as a fact. I mean, whether it's whites or blacks or whatever the case may be, this is a fact, and we need to really address our mindsets. It's not just a matter of the laws; it's our mindsets that need to be addressed. I'm a person who uses drugs, and yeah, I don't care what anybody says. I'm not going to give it up. Okay, drugs provide me with not just a matter of escape, but also enrich my life. Okay, and make life worth living. What really annoys me is when I hear people talking about drugs These are the same people who at 4 o'clock in the afternoon will go to a bar and have a drink, not realizing that they're going to a safe consumption center, because that's what a bar is. So this is the message that I think we need to share. So I thank you all for what you've shared with us. You've just pointed out the universality of what we're all doing.
Just some of them, you said there were 10 years minimal sentence for a few grams of heroin in Singapore. Is it effective or just on paper?
Yeah,
Is it
the
not?
death penalty actually, starting for 5 grams of heroin.
Is
yeah,
it,
the death penalty?
In practice, or is it just on
No,
paper?
well, that's okay. To answer that question, you need to, what is your kind of indicator for what is effective or not? Yeah, because the Singaporean government would say that it's effective. They've made society more secure, but even by the Singaporean government.
No, I don't mean, no, I just mean, is it done? Is it, are there?
Right. Yes, the
yeah,
Singaporean
okay,
government have
okay.
executed people this year already, yeah.
I'm from the Norwegian delegation.
Oh, right, okay, sorry.
Okay, so
What
it's,
do you mean, is it
so
effective?
it, so
Okay,
it's,
yeah.
so it's not, and to you,
Yeah.
only 2% of the people in prison are by narcotic.
Oh, no, 3.8. So almost-
Yeah, but that's quite, compared to Asia, that's very little.
oh, yes, our jurisdiction, the problem is gradually picking up. And so we better attack it now before it escalates.
Maybe I would have a question, and it's related to what you said, and it's a question for the 4 of you, so including for Olivia. Because Gloria, you said something very important about public opinion. And indeed, I mean, when the government is not in good position, in many countries, governments would use also this very, strong discourse. So in Ghana, in Canada, and also in Thailand, so what is also the support or pushback of public opinion? Do they understand? Because I agree with you, it's also a question of mindset. So do they understand your campaign in favor of decriminalization, or what you say? I mean, drug is a part of my life, and so yeah, that would be also very interesting to hear from you.
So I can quickly say, all of our surveys and everything have shown that something like almost 70% of the population is, want to change drug laws. They don't want this punitive measures. They're open to people being able to have their own personal possession. But again, it comes right back to corporate and powerful people who are making money out of this, which is why they want sanctions. So you're right. That's just my contribution.
Helene, if I can add something on that, and I think it's a really important question and something that is very complex actually, because a lot of the messaging given by politicians, and I probably don't need to tell the people in the room this, but it's very, it's designed alongside what policy they want to push. And what we see, I think, with the El Salvador case, for example, where they opened the Supermax prison and they put all of these like very dramatic, glossy films on the president's like Twitter page, etc., social media, of all these people being moved from one prison to this Supermax prison as kind of like, we're going to stop the like violence and drugs and everything. That apparently public support kind of went up for him around this, but is that actually an effective strategy? I think time is still to tell. Whereas if you have a state, like if you look at the city of Geneva, for example, where harm reduction and all of that, like the positive messaging around that, of course you get the public support because the messaging is so I think in our world working on prisons, we realize that public support is absolutely essential, but the evidence-based policy making is kind of like the first port of call, should be the first point, not rather than what the public think, because of when you're talking about prisons and so on, there's so much misinformation, and I think it's the same with drug policies because of the stigma and everything. So it's a really complex but important question that you asked, I think.
You, Gloria and Jonathan. Gloria?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard, it's difficult to answer that question because like to kind of measure public opinion. I know that in Thailand, they've done some surveys and there was support for not seeing people who use drugs going to prison, but there's a clear distinction between people who use and people engaged in the supply side. But I think even for other countries, it's hard to say what public, because the government campaigns dominate the messaging so much around tough on drugs, war on drugs. It's very hard for civil society, small as they already are, with their limited resources, to kind of counter that. I think, sorry, Jonathan.
I think there are a lot of myth around drug policy, and that is what has been pushed over the years, and that is what the public is consuming. If you are in Canada and you start teaching me how to eat potato chips and etc., when I get to Ghana, it will be difficult for me to eat food. That is something for you to know, that the kind of orientation we are keeping our public, because others even pay the data in statistics. You hold marijuana, you a criminal in terms of you have a gun. All those who rob are people with this. So we need to demystify this myth and the perception around drug to be able to let the public run in support of what we are saying, that even if you disagree and people are problematic users, they need treatment. It's not everybody who uses the drug, and there is no correlation between crime and this. But if there is, it is research data that will be able to change the perception using the media, because what the media know is what has been turned to them. The orientation of eating fufu in Ghana is what they know, so they can't talk about chips in Canada. That is what we need to look at. So research, scientific-based research, to be able to, and that is what we were able to use with Professor Kahat to meet Parliament, to have some level of orientation so that they are able to understand this. Thank you.
Hi, Happiness from the Philippines. You were just a quick sharing when it comes, I guess, to advocacy communication and how we talk about how one policy and the law drives over incarceration. But sometimes in the minds of people in the public, this is not clear. The link is not clear. And I think that has to be broken down in what way it drives over incarceration, and also the role of context, right? For example, and how people, for example, sometimes they say it's their choice to use or be associated, and therefore they're responsible for it. But maybe in terms of narratives, it's really shifting the discussion in the context in which they're moving around this, which also limits the choices that they have. For example, to thrive, to survive, and thrive. And the other one also with the mindset that was brought up, which was really important when we had conversations around it. Because here in the CND, the past days, it's always been shifting from punishment to health. And we need to understand that health is also anchored on punishment a lot of times. So that distinction, that binary thinking has to be broken. And we have to look at the underlying framework that is really driving the response, whether it's the criminal justice system or in health. And the other thing is that the Philippines was a jail decongestion summit last December. So that's government who spearheaded it, right? So in that discussion, so there's recognition, so that's fine. People recognize already it's overcongested, but it has to be very clear that it's the law. They kind of tiptoed around that. Yeah, and also I think in terms of the narrative, people using drugs, they did have somebody speak in the jail summit, but it was somebody who was saying she was innocent and she was thrust into this environment. So that whole narrative they can.
Thank you. Thank you very much for attending. Thank you to the.
Thank you. That's very good. I must say, you're very interesting.